Thanks for joining us for our weekly discussion. We call it Moral Side of the News. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, is a distinguished panel today. Reverend Dr. Kilen Gray, Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, Temple Shalom. Father Joe Graffis, Archdiocese of Louisville. And Reverend David Harkleroad, South Point Church in New Albany. Our first topic today: all of us are eager to put the coronavirus pandemic in the rearview mirror, but this week served up another potent reminder of just how deadly it remains. 9 new deaths put Louisville over the 1,000 mark for COVID-19 victims. To date, about 1/3 of all Americans have received at least one vaccine dose. With thousands expected at the Kentucky Derby in just a few weeks, and a sellout 40,000 spectators at the Texas Rangers home opener baseball game this week, I turn to our panel and ask the question: are we moving too fast to get back to normal?
I'm concerned because, I think we have great hopeful signs. Thank God people are getting vaccinated, although we need a lot more people vaccinated, especially our most needy rural and minority communities. But that's positive. But with the new variants out there, I just think we've got to be careful. And unfortunately, I think everybody's so eager to open up, we could have some problems, and that could get us in a mess. So everybody seems to be, the doctors and the people are saying, let's go a little slow. We hang in there for another week or a couple weeks, months, 2 months. We've been a long way through it, and I think that's wise. I think I'm concerned. Our churches are opening up more, and Easter we had some pretty good sized crowds. Again, socially distanced and masked, and praise God. But I'm uneasy.
I can understand what Churchill Downs is doing. I saw the news article on that about their plans, and I believe the normal capacity is around 175,000, and they're limiting it to 50,000. However, when I saw that baseball game in Texas, wow! I mean, okay, I'm going to wear a mask and I'm going to do what I need to do. But if that's a full house, I just can't see putting myself in harm's way. I remember former President George W. Bush was talking about going to a baseball game. Do any of you all know, did he attend that opening day game for the Texas Rangers or not?
Not sure.
What to try to do a full house? I mean, that's courting disaster, and it's not just courting disaster for the folks who are going to go to the baseball game. It's courting disaster for the fact that they're going to leave that baseball game. They're not going to all stay in Dallas, Texas. They're going to go to literally the four corners of the earth, and if they are carriers, then that's pretty terrifying.
Stan, just to build on that, we're talking about the Derby. I happened to see yesterday when I was with some friends, they flashed on Kilen, and Kilen is open for track, and they ran scenes through the crowds, and all of us were kind of jolted because I love Kilen as a track, but that open area where people kind of mingle, there was no social distancing going on at all. Most were wearing masks that I could tell, but that made me really uneasy. If that's a forerunner for the Derby, you can have 50,000 people, but if they're all in the same area, that's a disaster.
We're seeing, in my view, the impact of human impulse. We've been a year of human separation with separated relationships, debilitating mental and spiritual resilience across the board. It's very, very understandable that human angst and that need for connection. And it just reminds us of how God has created each of us, that we were made not to be in isolation. We were made with human connection. And so the more that you're used to that human connection, the more the push and the drive to regain those connections, with the fact of 500,000 people in this country that have died, who have died alone for the most part, that they have not been able to share in the final days of their loved ones. So the impulse to go beyond a little bit too fast to get back to some semblance of normal is very understandable, especially the fact that I'm a baseball fanatic. I love baseball. And I'm telling you, if I get into a city of a major park, and if the home team, no matter what the team is, if they're in town, I'm going to the park. However, I am not going to a park where there are no social distancing, with masks, with gloves, with all the other protocols. 6 feet social distance, there's a reason for that. And when I saw that picture of the Texas Stadium, although I celebrated to have my own personal party of opening day when opening days came, but that was a terrifying sight to see all of those persons, 75,000 people in that stadium. Yes, I do think that we're going too fast. And I think also that kudos to the scientists bring our vaccinations where we are right now. And that the speed, we're up to 25% of the population that's vaccinated. We're in a race between getting many people vaccinated and these variants that have come out right now. But I think that is definitely understandable, but we got to stay vigilant. We have gotten to 3%, 6%, depending on where you are, positivity rate for a reason. And that's because we follow the science. And so my encouragement to everybody is don't stop. It's weary, it's tough, it's hard, but get that mask on, continue to use sanitizers, 6 foot distance wherever you are. If you're fully vaccinated, connect with others who are fully vaccinated. The CDC has just released new findings that if you are fully vaccinated, you can be around other persons who have not been fully vaccinated, but not in big crowds. It's the big gatherings that becomes the super spreaders. And to this moment, it's still a possibility of being super spreaders right now.
David, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
I'll hold them for our second topic, but I have some, but I think I'll hold off. I appreciate what these guys are sharing.
I think that one thing that you did see, I was with some people on Easter evening, some old friends that we've actually only seen each other twice in a year, and but we were outside and around a big table, and we just had a blast just because it's been so long, and weather was so gorgeous and all that kind of stuff, and it was great to be there, but I felt really good afterwards, as we all did, because we can at least see each other. And I know with so many grandparents seeing grandkids and all that kind of stuff, it's been a very, very hard year for so many people. So we understand that, but we've got to watch it for another month.
All right, we'll move on to our second topic here on our program, Moral Side of the News. This week, Major League Baseball announced it will relocate this year's All-Star game from Atlanta to Denver. That decision in the wake of a new Georgia law that President Joe Biden, Delta Airlines, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, and others all claim will restrict voting access for Georgia residents, especially people of color. Among other things, the new law includes strict ID requirements for absentee ballots and limiting access to ballot drop boxes. So panel, the new law in Georgia, let's get your thoughts.
I'd love to jump in on this one. Honestly, I'm disappointed with President Biden on this one. I think he made a moral judgment based on either incorrect information or on virtue signaling. Several progressives have disagreed with him on this. I think the Washington Post gave him 4 Pinocchios for what he said this law would do. From what I can read, I don't think the law puts an undue strain on anyone. And I think that what they've now done for him to encourage MLB to move the game, his statements making this encouragement, I think does put a strain on the community there in Atlanta, and maybe particularly the minority community. look at the population, look at the demographics between Atlanta and Colorado. Got a huge difference there between Georgia and Colorado. And I just think that at one level, to suggest that this law puts a strain on minorities is somewhat demeaning to minorities, because if you read it, it's really not asking anything very difficult. Things like putting your social security number on a mail-in ballot. So I was disappointed with his moral judgment on this, and I think the moral fallout from him making some of the comments he made.
Well, given the history of this country's desire to tinker with elections and to disenfranchise people from voting freely, every expert that have been in the long fight to continue to fight for the enfranchisement of voting agree that this is unnecessary. The law is definitely unnecessary. There has not been any proven evidence of any voter fraud anywhere at any time. And so the laws that are being looked at in over 40 states in this country is a definite response of the last election, not to try to make sure that elections are protected. It is a response of the 2020 election. And it is primarily Republican-led legislators that are doing this without conversing with the very people that they claim to be protecting. And so every expert that have been fighting for voting rights across the country agree. As it relates to what MLB it has done, there's arguments on both sides. It's very interesting that all of the legislators, the newly elected legislators from Georgia, Stacey Abrams, the mayor Keisha Bottoms, all of them in concert agreed that MLB should not have pulled the All-Star game from Atlanta for the sake and for the concern of those that may be impacted economically by that. And President Biden did give voice to that, but he also gave voice to the history, to the historic reality of the fact that these laws that are passed were passed not in collaboration or not in conversation with those who would be affected by the law's impact. This does impact people who have employment situations whereby when you reduce the time and the availability of the ability to vote, it does impact them. And this law was made, in my view, without talking to the very people that they're claiming to be protecting their rights. I don't think that added qualifications for voting is right, that it should be automatic that people should vote. There should not be any qualifications beyond citizenship as it relates to voting. Voting should not be harder, it should be easier. But with the decision for MLB, it was a corporate decision that MLB made, which is their liberty and their freedom to make that decision. And whether that is the best decision or not, I think that's left for debate. But in my view, there is absolutely no debate that these laws are disadvantageous to African Americans and people of color. There is absolutely no question about that.
Reverend Gray,
It's my hope that. Go ahead.
could you cite maybe one or two things that you think are disadvantageous to the minority community? Like one or two things from the law that you would say, like, this is specifically a difficulty?
Well, I think that I can't cite specific for the law within the context of this conversation, but I can just go by the very people who represent the people that we're talking about and the experience that they've had and previous experiences that I've had in this country where qualifications and different types of things that have been placed upon people to make sure that they can vote ends up being a detriment. We do know in Georgia, and my brother who lives in Atlanta was one of those persons who for no reason was cleared off of the voting rolls because of a technicality within a particular application, who this person has been voting for years and he is in his 70s. So So there's various different ways that those things can impact. What is insulting to minority populations is persons that are in legislative offices who assume that there is no impact without conversation with the people that they're even talking about. That's what's insulting. It's very insulting to make a statement, a blanket statement that this has no impact on African Americans, when African Americans that you're talking about are not even part of the calculus, not even invited to even tell the story, and not even listened to when they have made complaints about how they have been disenfranchised. And laws are being passed without talking to these people. And the assumption of the privileged is that, well, we can speak for minorities and say what impacts and what does not impact minorities. That is the ultimate of insult.
I think there are a couple things, David, that at least I've read about the new laws. I find it a little curious that when people are standing in line for hours upon hours, that you can't give them water. I mean, it just, that doesn't make sense to me. I think another thing is that when the legislature can take control over the state, the Secretary of State, whose role is to look at elections or local elections, that can get into, rank politics. Of course, I guess both sides of that, as we all know, but that just seemed to be a little over the top. But I think you clearly stated that there are two issues here. One is the economic impact, and does that hurt more people, especially those who can be hurt the easiest by pulling a baseball out of an all-star game out of Atlanta. That's one issue. And then looking at some of the laws, there are other states that have much more restrictive laws than what Georgia did. But, it's interesting. Our own state has had some progressive new laws on this. I mean, I think we ought to be able to not limit how many times when people can vote, what days they can vote. Voting on Sunday, that could be a great thing. I think there's a lot of questions to be raised about these laws.
Well, I would say also that those who are crafting these laws, all of a sudden we got voting problems. All of a sudden, in all of these years, without any evidence to prove that there have been any malfeasance with votes. All of a sudden, in over 40 states, we've got these new laws that are being passed. And the issue is a lot of the target is on mail-in voting, which has been used for years with no problem. But now all of a sudden, because it's disadvantageous to Republicans, now it becomes an issue. And now we have to craft laws against restricting the time when mail-in voting can happen or when drop-off booths can take place. It's insidious. The entire aim of that is insidious. And without including history as part of our story, you can see straight through those types of development.
I appreciate your thoughts. I just see it a little differently. All theories aside about voting legal or illegal voting, I just feel like, Georgia was not, I didn't have a lot of confidence in how things were going in Georgia. The timeline, the way that it unfolded, we were hearing all kinds of information. I'd like to see all of our states have a healthier, streamlined, clear process for voting. At one point you said, the only obstacle should be citizenship, basically. And I agree with that. I think everyone should vote and be able to vote. They should have to prove two things. They should have to prove that they're a citizen and that they're only voting once. I think those should be the only two requirements. And I'd like to see our states have laws by which we can have confidence, we can have accurate and quick information. Someone made a joke during the countdown, during the election. They said, how can American Idol collect how many million votes over a commercial break, but these states can't seem to do it in a week? And I appreciate some of that point. I think that this could be done with more transparency, more clearly, more quickly, more effectively. And I don't think it has to disenfranchise anyone. So again, just kind of my perspective on how I think this law may not be perfect, but could be moving towards some healthy things for our folks.
One thing before Stan breaks in, and I want Stan to speak, that when you compare Georgia and, say, Florida, Florida started counting absentee ballots days before, but Georgia's law was we can't start counting those ballots until the day of the election, which is what postponed these enormous, 3 million absentee ballots, why it was so late. And that looked bad. I mean, when you compare those two states, but we ought to have some more standardization among states about some of those things, which I think is part of your point. Stan.
Perhaps what we need is election laws that would be not state law, but federal law. An honest election is an honest election and is an honest election, whether that election is in Alaska or Wyoming. David, what you mentioned before, those two criteria are universal, regardless of the state that you're in. So perhaps if they could simplify the law and make the law for all 50 states, then first of all, there would be fair and honest elections. That's the most important thing, that every vote that is a legitimate vote counts. And then we would not run into problems that would cause the Major League Baseball folks to say, we're not going to have our game in this state or that state, that the procedures would be the same procedures for all of our states.
So following up on what Stan just said, did any of you or do any of you anticipate there would ever be a federal standard for all voting rights and qualifications?
Well, I think we could do that with federal elections. I mean, one of the problems that we have is we've got federal elections that can be, Congress, national elections, but then you've got local elections, you've got neighborhood elections, you've got judges. I mean, there is different categories, which I think the states do have to have some say in how they run their local elections. But maybe there could be some standards. It's not easy, that's for sure. But I think, I thought, looking at our own state, I thought elections were run so well, and I can say only for Kentucky, that ran so smoothly that, considering COVID and everything that happened, I think it's amazing what we were able to do. And all the hard work and counters and all those people that are taken for granted, counting and recounting. I think we haven't asked them what would they suggest in all of this.
Yeah, I think that it would be beneficial to have a standard federal protocol for elections, with the exception of the statewide elections and local elections. But we have to remember that all of this controversy of the last election are about quote unquote voter irregularities among Black people who vote in Black areas. So we cannot mistake that. This whole conversation has been initiated because of what happened in 4 states in predominantly Black precincts. That's not a mistake. And that's why in minority communities, it has a bad taste in the mouth about now all of a sudden we got problems with elections.
The targeting of one group or another because of their race or for any reason, their race, their religion, their orientation, the targeting of one group, that to me defines the term un-American.
All right, to finish out our program, a little different story today on Moral Side of the News. It took 80 years, but now with the help of DNA identification, the remains of a Kentucky sailor killed during the Pearl Harbor attack are coming home. Navy Seaman Second Class Howard S. Majors, who was just 18 years old when he died aboard the USS Oklahoma. The young Navy man was from the Mary Oaks community in Barron County and will be buried in Smiths Grove, Kentucky on May 29th. Panel, any words for the community and for those serving our country? We have about 4 minutes left.
The first thing is to thank the survivors, that family, for the sacrifice of their loved ones, and the fact that we today are in debt to him and to all of those folks. They say this is the greatest generation. That's truth. This generation is the greatest generation, because they literally saved us from a catastrophe that is unimaginable.
But definitely my prayers go to that family, to every veteran family, that for every veteran that has served in our country. Having veterans in my own family and a part of my church congregation, at whatever ways that we can honor them and give respect and honor for their sacrifice, I'm 100% behind it.
I thank all the families for pursuing this, but I also thank the armed forces and especially the forensic experts who continue to do that. As my generation were mostly in Vietnam, and many of my classmates, I lost some grade school classmates and some college classmates in Vietnam, and so much of that, finding some of the remains of those now 50 plus years afterwards, is very gratifying that, we're trying to honor people who have sacrificed their lives for us. And for all of those who serve our country in that way, we need to give honor and praise.
Yeah, I think just what an encouraging story. Closure for this family. I think this story is a great reminder for younger generations of the price that was paid for us. I'm so grateful for the veterans. My grandfather actually fought in World War II in the Navy, and I believe I'm telling this story accurately. He was at Pearl Harbor pre-bombing and was out on a ship when it was bombed. So I think I've got that accurate. I meant to confirm that, but just so grateful for the men and women who served this country. And I hope our younger folks will hear these stories and realize the price that was paid. And I hope this is just great closure for that family.
I agree. My dad was in the Navy in World War II, so go Navy.
I've got a father-in-law in the house with me here. There's a Korean veteran, man. So he'd be glad to hear these comments on when he watches the show at 5 a.m.
Well, it's good to know we have at least one visitor and viewer. My father served on the island of Saipan as a crew mechanic on a B-29. May he rest in peace. He died at age 93 a few years ago. Well, thank you, panel, for this wonderful discussion today on Moral Side of the News. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Kilen Gray, Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, Father Joe Graffis, and Reverend David Harkleroad. The 68th annual WHAS Crusade for Children is right around the corner, June 5th and 6th. Please help out. More than 200 agencies are supported by your generosity to the crusade. You can find out more at whascrusade.org. You can also text to donate. The word crusade, text that word to 50155. Text crusade to 50155. You can also use Venmo and PayPal. New this year, if you'd like to catch this program again, just jump on YouTube and search for Moral Side of the News. We'll be back again next week with another edition of our program. Until then, be safe, be well, and thank you, panel.